research focuses on the intersection of system and machine learning, including efficient deep learning, AutoML, federal learning, and also machine learning system. So let's welcome Professor Zhang. Can you share your screen?
Sure. Can you see that?
Yes. Yes,
that works.
Please go ahead.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. So I can proceed, right? So I can get started.
That's correct. Yes, please.
Got it. So thanks, Tal, for the very nice introduction, and it's my great pleasure to be here. To present this presentation. So yeah, my name is Zhang. I'm a faculty member at Michigan State University. The title of today's talk is Efficient Neural Architecture Search at Scale. So neural architecture search, or NAS in short, has attracted significant attention in the machine learning community in recent years. So one of the key reasons behind it is that architectures found by architecture search are able to achieve superior performance than manually designed ones. So in general, a NAS pipeline consists of three key components: the search space, the search algorithm, and a performance estimation strategy. So the search space usually contains all the possible neural architectures to be searched. Specifically, it defines a set of operations, for example, identity, convolutions, or pooling operations, and how these operations can be connected to form valid neural architectures. So the search algorithm starts sampling a network architecture candidate from the search space. The performance evaluation strategy evaluates the performance of the sampled architecture candidate. And then the performances can be accuracy, it can be floating point operations or flops, or it can be hardware-related metrics such as latency or power consumption. So the performance of the architecture candidates is then returned to the search algorithm as a feedback to sample the next architecture candidate from the search space. However, the search space usually contains hundreds of thousands or even millions of neural architectures. So therefore, the key bottleneck of neural architecture search is its extremely high search cost. So to address this bottleneck, existing works either focus on search space design and partitioning, or developing effective search algorithms, for example, evolution, reinforcement learning, or Bayesian optimization, or designing efficient performance estimation strategies, such as weight sharing, to speed up the neural architecture search process. So in this talk, I wanted to talk about something different, which is to shed light on the importance of architecture encoding on enhancing the efficiency as well as the overall performance of neural architecture search. So in particular, I will talk about two works on this particular topic. The first work, named Arc2Vec, proposes a unsupervised learning-based architecture encoding method that decouples architecture representation learning and architecture search in the downstream into two separate processes. The second work, named CATE, proposes to encode computations instead of structures of neural architectures via a transformer-based encoder. So the majority of the NAS methods actually encode the neural architectures in the search space using something called adjacency matrix-based encoding. In this encoding, the operation matrices encodes the operations, and the adjacency matrix encodes the connections between all these operations. For example, the one-hot adjacency matrix encoding is then created by flattering the adjacency matrix and concatenating it with a list of node operations labels, where each position in the operation list is a single integer valued feature or just one hot vector. However, the size of the adjacency matrix grows quadratically as the search space scales up, making the downstream architecture search much less efficient. To address the drawback of this adjacency matrix-based encoding, so learning-based encoding methods with different types of architecture encoders, for example, LSTM, MLPs, or graphic convolutional neural nets emerged in recent years. So the underlying principle behind those learning-based encoding is actually very straightforward. Instead of searching in the original high-dimensional and unorganized search space, the learning-based encoding uses architecture encoders to learn an architecture embedding in the lower dimensional latent space. Conducting neural architecture search on such low dimensional latent space is much easier and is therefore more efficient. Well, if we take a closer look, in these existing methods, architecture embeddings and the search space are actually jointly optimized in a supervised manner. So supervision is actually guided by the accuracies of architectures selected by the search algorithms. However, we find out that such joint supervised optimization cannot necessarily improve embedding learning due to the entangling architecture representation learning and the architecture search together. So as a consequence of that entanglement, these methods are biased towards weight-free operations, for example, the identity and max pooling instead of the convolutions, which are often preferred early on in the search process, and therefore resulting in lower final accuracies. So to this end, we propose a very simple yet effective method based on unsupervised architecture representation learning for neural architecture search. So we name our method Drawback. The key distinction between our approach and the existing ones is that to decouple the architecture representation learning and architecture search in two separate processes. So by learning architecture representations using only the neural architectures without their accuracies, the Drawback is able to construct the less biased architecture embeddings, which benefit the downstream architecture search in terms of efficiency and robustness. To achieve this, Drawback utilizes a variational graph isomorphic autoencoder to learn the embeddings of neural architectures in an unsupervised manner. Specifically, let A denote the adjacency matrices and X denote the operation matrix. So we first augment A as to transfer the original directed graph into undirected one to allow bidirectional information flow. The encoder and decoder are the same as the variational graph autoencoders, except that the inference model is parameterized by a graph isomorphism network. This is because we aim to learn an architecture embedding that is invariant to isomorphic graphs. So during training, model weights are learned by iteratively maximizing a region lower bound, and the optimization objective is to reconstruct the network architecture represented by the adjacency and operation matrices. Lastly, you notice that there's a KL term in the training objective, which is used to regularize the mapping from the direct space to the continuous latent space. It helps to perform better inferences and to preserve the validity performance of the model. So once the pre-trained embeddings are obtained, they are sent to the downstream search algorithm as inputs for architecture search. In this particular work, we used reinforcement learning and Bayes optimization as the two representative search algorithms. For reinforcement learning, the pre-trained embeddings are passed to the policy LSTM for sampling, and we use the validation accuracy of the sampled architectures as a reward. For Bayes optimization, the pre-trained embeddings are used to select the top K architectures in terms of the validation accuracy in each round of the search. So we first examine the pre-trained performance of our approach on 3 commonly used NAS search spaces, NAS Search 101, NAS Search 201, and DARTS. So in particular, we compare ArcToWAC with 2 popular baselines, Graphic Autoencoder, GAE, and the Variational Graph Autoencoder, VGAE, under 3 metrics, where the first metric is reconstruction accuracy, which measures how accurate the reconstructed neural architecture are. The second metric is validity, which measures how often the generated architectures are valid. Lastly, the third metric is called is the uniqueness, which measures how many generated valid architectures are unique. So as shown in the table below, ArcToWAC achieves the highest reconstruction accuracy, validity, and uniqueness in all the 3 search spaces due to its superior neighborhood aggregation and the generalization capabilities. Secondly, to understand why the pre-trained embeddings are superior over embeddings obtained from the supervised learning counterparts, we have conducted a series of experiments. First, we compare the predicted performance of the pre-trained embeddings and the supervised embeddings, right, which are the embeddings learned from the supervised counterpart. So this metric measures how well the embeddings can predict the performance of the corresponding architectures. To do that, we train a Gaussian process model with 250 samples to predict all the data and report results across 10 different seeds on NAS Bench 101. We use RMSE and the Pearson correlation coefficient to evaluate points with test accuracy larger than 0.8. So the figure on the right demonstrates that the pre-trained embeddings have a better predicted performance than the supervised counterparts. Secondly, we compare the distribution of the L2 distance between the architecture pairs by added distance on NAS Bench 101. So this is measured by the 1,000 architecture sample in a long random walk and the 1 added distance apart from consecutive samples. We plot the relationship between the L2 distance in the latent space, as shown on the right, and the latent added distance of the corresponding neural architectures for both pre-trained and supervised embeddings. So as shown in the figure, the L2 distance of the pre-trained embeddings grows monotonically with the increasing added distance. This result indicates that the ArcToWAC can preserve the closeness between 2 architectures measured by added distance. In contrast, as you can see, such closeness is not well captured by the supervised counterparts. So this observation further indicates that the pre-trained embeddings obtained by our approach are able to better capture the structural information of neural networks and therefore make similar architectures cluster better. Third, we visualize the latent space learned by ArcToWAC and its supervised counterpart in the 2D space. As you can see here, for ArcToWAC on the left, the embeddings of architectures span the whole latent space, and the architectures with similar accuracies are clustered and distributed more smoothly in the latent space. Conducting architecture on such smooth performance surface is much easier and is therefore more efficient. On the contrary, for the supervised counterpart on the right, the embeddings are discontinuous in the latent space, and the transition of accuracy is actually non-smooth. This indicates that the joint optimization guided by the accuracy cannot injectively encode architecture structures. As a consequence of that, architecture does not have its unique embedding anymore, and making the task of architecture search a more challenging task. Lastly, this slide visualizes a sequence of architecture cells decoded from the learned latent space of ArcToWAC and the supervised counterpart. The 2 sequences actually start from the same point. For both sequences, Each architecture is the closest point of the previous one in latent space, excluding previously visited ones. As you can see here, for our approach, which is the top sequence, the adjacent architectures change smoothly and embrace similar connections and operations. On the contrary, the supervised counterpart does not group similar connections and operations well, and therefore has much higher added distance between adjacent matrices. So now we compare the architecture search performance of our approach with many other state-of-the-arts. Specifically, we reproduce the discrete encoding-based method, which is the state-of-the-art, including random search or RS, regularized evolution, reinforcement learning, and BOHB, which is the based optimization-based approach. For supervised learning-based counterparts and ARC2WAC, we use reinforcement learning and BO as the two representative search algorithms. As you can see here, the plot on the right shows that for BOHB and reinforcement learning are the two best performing search methods using discrete encoding. However, they perform slightly worse than the supervised counterparts. In contrast to those state-of-the-arts, ARC2WAC consistently outperforms its supervised counterpart and the discrete encoding after 5 times to 10 to the power 4 word clock seconds, showing a very strong performance compared to the state-of-the-art. This table shows the results on NAS Bench 201. As you can see, searching with ARC2WAC consistently outperforms the state-of-the-art approach on all the 3 datasets included in the NAS Bench 201, leading to better validation and test accuracies, as well as the reduced variability measured by standard deviation. Both the adjacency matrix-based encoding and the ARC2WAC I just talked about belong to the category of structure-aware encoding at a high level, where the goal actually is to learn the encoding that preserve the structural information of the neural architectures. However, as illustrated in this slide, 2 neural architectures with different structures can actually represent the same computation. So this makes encoding computation actually a superior option than encoding the architectures, which is what we did for ARC2WAC and the adjacent matrix-based encoding approach. Well, this is because encoding computation could map the neural networks with different structures, but similar accuracies to the same region. This contributes to a encoding space with respect to the actual performance of the neural architectures, which is actually the fundamental and the ultimate metric to evaluate the performance of neural architectures. As one of the computation-aware encoding method, path-based encoding is created in the past by giving a binary feature to each possible path from the input node to the output node of the neural network. Well, although path-based encoding is able to map neural architectures with different structures, but the same computation to the same encoding, it scales exponentially because it has to enumerate all the possible passes in the neural network to generate the encoding. One remedy to this is to use truncation, but the truncation, which truncates the part of these encoding, would lead to the information loss, obviously. In addition, the path-based encoding shows worse generalization performance, especially in the outside search space compared to other encoding methods. This is because it could not generalize to unseen passes that are not included in the training search space. Another well-known computation-aware encoding method is a learning-based one named D-VAE. D-VAE uses a shallow GRUs to encode a computation, and its decoder is trained with the variational autoencoder reconstruction loss via something we call asynchronous message passing. This approach, however, is very challenging actually in practice because directly learning the generative model based on a single architecture is actually non-trivial. As a result, its pre-training is much less effective, and the downstream math performance is not really competitive compared to the state-of-the-arts. To alleviate the limitations of those existing work, we propose a new method we named CATE. As shown in the slide, CATE takes paired computational similar architectures as its input, similar to BERT, which is a very popular computational model in the literature of NLP. CATE also trains a transformer-based model using the so-called masked language modeling objective. In particular, each input architecture pair is corrupted by replacing a fraction of their operations with a special masked token, and the model is trained to predict those masked operations from those corrupted architecture pair. So this is actually very similar to what BERT and the ML objective is doing. However, CATE differs from BERT in two important aspects. The first, in the context of language modeling, as applied as being used in BERT, each prediction has its inductive bias given the contextual information from different positions. Right? Because in language modeling, every single word has a positional contextual meaning compared to other adjacent or other words in the language. However, this is actually not the case in architecture encoding learning. This is because the prediction distribution is uniform for any valid graph, making it very challenging to directly learn the generative model from a single architecture. So that means there's no contextual information that is available in neural architecture, the problem of neural architecture search. As an example, if we mask a convolution 101 operator and do the prediction, all the possible operators, for example, conv 101, conv 1 by 1, conv 5 by 5, or max pooling have the same prediction probabilities as long as it forms a valid computation graph. So in other words, there's no contextual bias in the prediction in the context of architecture encoding. Therefore, CATE incorporates a pairwise pre-training scheme that encodes computationally similar architecture pairs through two transformers with shared parameters. The two individual encodings are then concatenated, and the concatenated encoding is fed into another transformer with a cross-attention encoder to encode the joint information of the architecture pair. Second, the fully visible attention mask used in BERT may not be used for architecture encoding learning. This is because it does not really reflect the single directional flow of neural architectures. Therefore, instead of using a bidirectional transformer encoder, which is used in BERT, CATE directly uses adjacency matrix to compute the causal mask. A pair of operations within the architecture are dependent if there is either an edge that directly connects them, which we refer to as local dependency, or a path made of a series of such edges that indirectly connects them, which we refer to as long-range dependency. So we wanted to capture both those local dependency and long-range dependency so that we can have a very strong encoding. This can be done by augmenting the adjacency, the original adjacency matrix using something called a flight algorithm, where you actually encode both the local and long-range dependencies together in the same matrix. Together with the MLL objective, CATE is able to encode the computations of architectures and to learn dense and deep contextualized architectural representations to preserve both local and global computation information in your architectures. This is actually very important for architecture encoding to be generalized to outside search space beyond the training search space, as we will show later. So to evaluate the performance of our CATE approach, we first compare CATE with 11 architecture encoding schemes in the literature under 3 major encoding dependent NAS subroutines on NAS Bench 101. These encoding schemes include, one-hot, categorical, continuous adjacency matrix-based encoding, as well as 3 versions of the path-based encoding and their corresponding truncated version. We also compare CATE with, those learning-based approach, D-VAE, and also ARC2WAC. So for the 3 major downstream NAS subroutines, there's the sample random architecture subroutine includes the random search. The perturb architecture subroutine includes the regularization, evolution, and local search. And the trained predictor model subroutine includes popular neural predictors, Bayes seam optimization with Gaussian process, and a DNGO, which is basically a Bayes optimization with a neural architecture with faster computation to compared to the Gaussian process. For more information, you can refer to our CATE paper. So this figure demonstrates the results. As you can see here, for each subroutine, we only show the top 5 best performing encoding scheme because due to the space limitation. Overall, despite there's no overall best encoding method, we found that CATE is always among the top 5 performing encoding scheme across all the subroutines. Specifically, for sample-based architecture subroutine, we found that random search performs the best. The random search using continuous encoding performs slightly worse. For perturb architecture subroutine, CATE outperforms adjacency matrix-based encoding. For trained predictor-based subroutine, we find that CATE is competitive with neural predictor and outperforms all the other encodings used along with Bayes optimization. So this shows that the training objective in CATE is more efficient compared to those learning-based approach such as D-VAE and ARC2WAC. In our second experiment, we compared the architecture search performance based on the CATE encoding with all the state-of-the-art architecture search method, NAS Bench 101 on the left and NAS Bench 301 on the right. NAS Bench 301 is a new surrogate benchmark on the Dart search space, which is actually much larger than the NAS Bench 101. We report a test error of 200 independent runs. As you can see, our results shows that actually encoding matters, especially in the very large search space, such as in NAS Bench 301. In particular, as you can see on the right, on 301, CATE with DNGO and CATE with DNGO and local search not only converge faster, but also lead to better final search performance given the same budgets. In other words, if you have a very limited budgets to search the architecture using our method, you can find a architecture that has the best accuracy, given that search budget compared to other neural active search methods. Finally, we evaluate the generability, the generalization ability of CATE beyond the search space on which it was trained, which is we called outside search space. This is actually very important because in practical, in real world practice, you always wanted to, you always have a very limited sampled search space, and when you encounter a new problem, you wanted to, which includes a new search space, you wanted to leverage whatever you have trained or learned in your existing search space, and can see if you can be generalized that in those outside new search space. So as you can see, we compare the CATE with the adjacency matrix-based encoding. As you can see here, CATE outperforms the adjacency-based encoding by a large margin. This indicates that CATE can better contextualize the computation information, which generalize better when adapting to the outside search space. Okay, so to summarize as a summary of my talk today, in this talk, I shed light on the importance of architecture encoding, on the problem of neural architecture search. In particular, I talked about two work on focusing on how important the architecture encoding to the performance and the efficiency of the neural architecture search. The first work, Drawback, proposes a supervised learning-based approach that decouples architecture representation learning and architecture search into two separate processes. The second work, CATE, proposes to encode in computation instead of structures of neural architectures through a transformer-based encoder. We hope this talk can inspire more research on studying architecture encoding to achieve efficient and scalable neural architecture search research. That's for more detailed information and the source codes, please refer to our papers and the GitHub repos showing on the slide. So this concludes my talk today, and thanks for all of your attention.
Great, thanks for the great talk. So we have two questions. I will let each one to ask the question. So Kush, can you go ahead?
Hey, I was initially I asked this question, but I think I understand the. So initially, I was thinking that why is uniqueness such a measure of quality of architecture, right? Because uniqueness doesn't really mean quality of that architecture, but from the search point of view, it's important. So compared to genetic algorithm or similar global randomized search algorithms. Did you do anything special to prove or to guarantee uniqueness? That if you can talk a little bit about that, that will be interesting.
So how to say this? We consider isomorphic nets, right? As I mentioned before, right? And the uniqueness is it can the unique architectures will be learned and encoded in those embeddings we learned. So if you learn better, so you can how to say encode unique architectures in a better way. So all these just demonstrates that the encoding is well learned, and yeah, the method is very effective in terms of learning unique embeddings.
Okay, thank you. We still have time for a second question. So Ayush,
Sure.
you ask your question, please.
Hi. So I wanted to understand more about how. So you talked about the uniqueness in terms of the different DNN architectures the proposed approach can explore, but how does it compare in terms of the search time? For example, with works like Proxylist NAS, which by jointly optimizing both for the structure and the parameters itself, they were able to cut down the GPU hours quite significantly.
Well, uniqueness is one of the many features or characteristics that characterize or describe architectures, right? Well, in terms of the efficiency, I think the primary reason that our approach can contribute to higher efficiency of architecture search is really, if you recall, we have this smoothly encoded latent space, where similar architectures are clustered in similar regions, right? So by doing that, you're actually creating a very smooth latent space, the surface of latent space. And if you search on those smooth latent space, actually it gives less burden on your search algorithm itself, right? And that's why you enhance your efficiency, no matter what search algorithm you're using, obviously excluding the random search.
I see. Got it. I just have a quick follow-up question on reducing the latent search space you mentioned. So you mentioned that the VAE is able to come up with architectures which have similar properties. I'm just curious, like, would like simpler clustering algorithms like k-means or other clustering algorithms also work in as a replacement for VAE, or like what were the particular intuitions for using VAE for this work?
Well, Variational autoencoder is actually a very, very strong autoencoder. We have tried many other autoencoders, and VAE performs the best among those. This is the primary reason why we use that in our Arc2Vec work. And for k-means, k-means I regard it as a non-learning based clustering approach, right? You just cluster that in the original space where learning based approach such as the VAE are trying to learn a latent space, right, from the original space. Basically, we're mapping that architectures in the raw search space into a latent space of learning, where you are actually conducting the search in the learned latent space, which is lower dimension, much lower dimension than the original search space, which is the original search space, which is high dimensional. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, we still have time for another question.
Terry, I don't really have a question, but just a food for thought. I mean, so where the rubber meets so there are some conventional wisdom in the architecture community, right? So if your model is very large and it requires a significant amount of memory space to store the activation and the weights, then you would benefit from an in-memory or larger memory size or in-memory architecture. So it would be good to first of all see whether this neural architectural search indeed finds those conventional wisdom, validates them to a certain extent. So that's one. And I mean, if in the future we would love to see those kind of results. And then the second point is that, so that's very model specific architectures, right? But all of us know that, systems or silicon chips are not built for a workload, right? It's always a mix of workload. And if you want to run the search in a mix of workloads, then would you end up in a design like a GPU? And it's right or not, right? So those would be the really cool things to see in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And these are the encoding-based approaches I presented today are very generic. You may notice that our objective is trying to basically focusing on, for example, accuracy, but actually you can incorporate multiple objectives. For example, the memory footprints of the models, right, or the sparsity of the models, combined with the accuracy as the something called multi-objective architecture search. And our approach is actually can be definitely extended to those multi-objectives. Here, I just show a single objective, work, but definitely can be used to search under the multi-objective scenario. For the second comment, I do agree, where you wanted to have to train. I think if I understand correctly of your question, is to mix workloads. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I think yeah, that's something very interesting to explore in the future. I agree. Thanks for the suggestion.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for a very good, interesting presentation from Professor Zhang, and thanks very much for your time.